Where all have you worked at?
I've worked for quite a few agencies in short-term positions. I worked for the Missouri Department of Conservation for a number of years, as well as the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. My previous position was working as a fisheries biologist in District 9, which is Russellville, Arkansas. I helped manage Dardanelle Lake, and then now I'm taking Jeremy Risley's position in District 2. So, are we ready to go?
Ready to go.
Alrighty. So in this talk, I'm going to give a brief history of Greers Ferry Lake. I'm also going to be talking about what it takes to grow a world record. Along the way, I hope to answer a lot of common questions I hear from anglers. Can you go back? Yes. And then lastly, I'm going to be talking about what AGFC is doing to improve the fishery. And then we're going to end with questions. All right. So the history of Greers Ferry Lake all starts in 1959 when it was constructed. The dam was finalized in 1964. It was formed by the U.S. Corps of Engineers for hydroelectric power, flood control, water supply, as well as recreational opportunities. Under Amendment 35, Arkansas Game and Fish has the right to regulate and monitor the wildlife and fish populations of the lake. Of course, our goal is always to conserve and enhance the fish and wildlife populations. I like this picture from 1960. This is as the lake is starting to fill. Some of you might have been around when this was happening. Maybe this is you in the picture, I don't know. But that would have been a unique thing to see for sure. Next slide. After the lake filled, we got the lake we all know and love. It's around 32,000 acres, has 293 miles of shoreline. Its conservation pool is set by the Corps of Engineers at 462 feet above mean sea level, and has a max depth around 240 feet. Next slide. Not wanting to work.
There we go.
Just to put it in context with other lakes, many lakes were formed in the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, with Norfolk being one of the first ones in 1944, followed by Bull Shoals, Washita, Greers Ferry, and then Beaver. And this was all under the Corps of Engineers U.S. Flood Control Act. So now to give you a history of stocking in Greers Ferry Lake. Records are somewhat spotty, but in the 1960s we do have records of them stocking largemouth bass. Click. Got a lot of clicks here. In 1965, followed by rainbow trout in 1968. And both of these were continually stocked. And then we got Greers Ferry Nursery Ponds was formed in 1972 to help more efficiently raise fish for Greers Ferry. The nursery pond is about 17 acres. It's still in use today. We've raised a number of fish species over the years, including crappie, walleye, black bass species, as well as forage such as bluegill and threadfin shad. Next, other notable stockings were in the 70s and 80s. There were stockings of blue catfish, hybrid stripers, and a smallmouth bass in 1982. There was also a one-time stocking of lake trout in 1988. Through this, trout stockings were ceased and ended in 1991 due to creel surveys that showed that not a lot of people were fishing for these fish on the lake. Rather, they were more fishing them on the tailwaters. So the demand of trout for the tailwaters kind of made them shift from stocking them on the lake. But through the 90s and 2000s, AGFC continued to stock predator species, consistently stocking walleye, crappie, hybrid striped bass, black bass species, and catfish species. But then in 2014, we had a shad kill that was pretty significant on the lake, and we turned our attention then to stocking more forward species such as shad and bluegill. We had another recording of shad kill in 2021, and we believe there's probably been others.
What caused those shad kills?
I'm going to talk about that.
Right.
Really from our old data, looking through old reports, we find that really the good old days of Greers Ferry Lake, and some of you would probably second this, was in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s. Our creel reports from 1972 and 73, as well as from 1988 through 92, showed that there was significant harvest of fish going on during this time, and there's mentions of great numbers of forage species, including threadfin shad. So in the 80s and 90s, a lot of records were broke on Greers Ferry Lake. The lake trout state record, which is still the state record, was set in 1997 by Clark Stevenson. He caught an 11-pound, 5-ounce fish. That's not nearly as impressive as some of the fish that catch up north, but still a big fish. We also had several times that the hybrid striped bass record was broken, both at a state and world record level. It was finally set in 1997 by Gerald Stamm with a 27-pound, 5-ounce fish. But of course, the most impressive fish that came out of this era was the world record walleye. This was caught by Al Nelson in March of 1982. It weighed 22 pounds, 11 ounces, so a very impressive fish. There is some controversy whether this is still the world record. Predating it in 1960, Maury Harper caught a walleye weighing 25 pounds, 4 ounces. It was shortly then disqualified based on photos like this one on the left. It didn't look like a 25-pounder. However, in 2019, the Harper family brought forward more pictures of the walleye, including pictures with Harper's wife, and they were able to look at old doctor physicals and compare her size to the fish and say that this was indeed a 25-pound fish. But whether you believe it or not, this is, whether it's a state record or a world record, the 22-pound, 11-ounce fish caught by Al Nelson is definitely impressive.
Does it say what area of the lake these records were caught?
Yeah, I'm guessing being March, it probably was up a tributary in the upper lake, but that's just my guess. I don't know. So this of course brings the question of why did we see all these big fish then, and then of course why are we not seeing them now? That's probably the biggest question I get from anglers, and we're going to kind of dive into that. So to answer that, I really need to talk about what it takes to grow a world record. It's really a combination of factors coming together just right for us to have a world record fish. You need to have an abundance of forage, quality habitat, the water level and weather has to be just right, and of course the genetics of the fish need to be supreme. So when I talk about forage abundance, I'm really talking about the forage to predator ratio. We can alter this as fisheries managers through stockings as well as harvest regulations. So here's just a represented illustration of that. Here we have a lot of forage and some predators. You really want, of course, a lot more forage than there is predators. In the 1980s, this was definitely the case based on old creel studies, that there was plenty of forage in the lake, as well as these stockings of rainbow trout also provided forage for these fish. And even though there was other competing predators in the lake, we were still seeing some very nice fish. Unfortunately, 2014 knocked us back with especially the shad abundance, and with added predators and stockings of hybrid striped bass, our fish soon, of course, kind of became skinny, and we have indications of slow growth, meaning that they're just taking a long time to reach bigger sizes. So our response, of course, was to stop stocking predators, because you just end up with a situation like this where you just have a lot of small fish out there, and instead stock forage, so that there's more food, because that's what we really need to bring back, was the forage population. Another tool is the reduced harvest regulations, allowing anglers to take some of those predator species. In 2021, we made a number of changes, including knocking back the largemouth bass minimum length limit from 15 to 12. We implemented a 14-inch minimum length limit for walleye, and then a no creel limit for white bass, which was previously 25. So how do we know when we have that right ratio? It's really based off of our sampling. It helps us determine what fishing regulations we need, and when, how many, and what species to stock. So one metric we get from doing fish sampling is relative weights. Just teaching you a quick knowledge about relative weights. If you have a value around 100, it means you have a fat, healthy fish. If you have a value around 90, you have a healthy fish. And then values less than 85 mean you have a skinny walleye. Here's some data from 2010 through 2018. As you can see, we have a lot of averages below 85 there, with the biggest dip happening in 2015, which of course is the caused by that 2014 shad kill. Here are individual fish and their scores. As you see, they're not all below 85. The orange line here, there are some around 100, but the vast majority are less than 85. Kind of going from forage to habitat, which of course are tied together. Habitat can be broken down into two categories: physical structure and water quality. So we believe one of the reasons why we had many of these records was because of the new lake effect. New reservoirs have the best physical structure as well as water quality or chemistry. They're kind of like us reservoirs are. They're healthiest in their early years, and then not so much later on. So when the world record walleye was set, the lake would have been 18 years old, which I don't know about you, but I felt pretty good at 18. So just kind of showing you how this works. In the early years of a reservoir, it's pretty much a flooded forest. You know, there's a lot of structure out there for fish to spawn in and to hide in, and for predators to ambush prey. This, of course, is that old 1960s photo, and you can see just how much structure is being inundated by water. So we believe this is kind of what the lake looked like in the 80s. There was quite a bit of structure still in the lake. Of course, you lose the leaves and everything. Next slide. But in the later years, which is probably more what it looks like today, there's just a lot of standing poles. There's not as much branching structure. And then, of course, as we continue on, we're just going to lose more of that woody structure. The benefits of physical structure are kind of obvious. One of the biggest examples is like the coral reefs. Typically, when you have a diversity and abundance of physical structure, you will have a diversity and abundance of fish. Another important thing to consider with habitat, since fish live in water, is water quality. Important parameters for fish, of course, are temperature and dissolved oxygen, which, as Marty mentioned, we're going to have the group help us out with that, and we can get you going. Turbidity, which is just water clarity, since a lot of our predators are side feeders. Alkalinity and pH can affect growth, as well as nutrients such as phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen. To illustrate this, I have the aquatic food pyramid here. On the bottom, you have your nutrients, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and then those are absorbed and taken up by your algae and plankton, which are then eaten by your smaller juvenile fish and aquatic insects, and then so on to smaller fish, and then finally at your top you have your top predators, your largemouth bass, your walleye. And my point here I like to make is that if you're limited at the bottom, your potential for the top is also going to be limited. Unfortunately, how Greers, Ferry is placed in the Ozarks, there's just not a lot of nutrients coming into the lake. So of course, we're not going to have the production of a lake such as like in the Delta region or southern Arkansas. Again, showing you how new lake effect has improved production. In the earlier years, just all that new freshly inundated soil releases a lot of nutrients, as well as the decay of all the vegetation. So in the early years, you usually start out with more nutrients in your water than later on. Later on, often in deep highland reservoirs, those nutrients will settle into the sediments and then get kind of trapped there, so they're not readily available for your primary producers or your algae. So that kind of moves me into weather and lake levels. For a reservoir, lake levels are kind of course, determined by precipitation as well as the Corps of Engineers management. We find that highland reservoirs, such as Norfolk, Bull Shoals, and Greers Ferry, they have good fish production or recruitment during high water years. And to kind of, again, illustrate this, as you flood the surrounding area, you provide great cover for those fish to spawn in, you provide additional nutrients off the landscape, and that just helps have boom years of both predator and prey species. We see a lot of pictures like this on the top where you have a lot of flooded timber. That's just great habitat for fish. On the bottom, that's showing a picture from Bull Shoals. They've had a lot of high water years recently, which has kind of benefited the lake. It of course makes it hard to catch some fish during these times, but it does benefit the fish population. Low waters can also be beneficial if they just happen occasionally. Occasionally you do want a low water year because it helps congregate bait fish so that those predators can feed more effectively on them. In an ideal world, we would have high water years about every 3 years and low water years every like 5 to 6 years. Looking at the lake elevation 10 years prior to when we had that world record set in 1982, you can see that there's quite a few high water years happening about 2 to 4 years, as well as a low water year in there. We believe that this probably helped produce the large amount of forage that fed that state and world record. So yeah, I've shown you the high water years, and then the next one shows you the low. All right. So weather, of course, can also be bad for us. Winter kill events happen when there's just a lot of cold days. Ice can prevent oxygen exchange from the atmosphere to the water. And in shallow areas of the lake, such as shallow tributaries, it can cause it where there's low enough oxygen, where there's a fish kill. Usually the species most affected during these times are shad. These just naturally occur from time to time. There's records of them throughout history of big shad kills happening just due to unusual cold winters. So next I'm going to talk about genetics, which I consider a smaller piece of the trophy puzzle. And why I say that is because good genetics doesn't always equal trophy fish. You know, you can have the genetics to be a big, strong guy, but if you don't have the nutrition, you're probably going to be scrawny. So genetics is really a new science, especially to fisheries biologists. Just to put in context, when they started stocking Greers Ferry Lake with walleye in the 70s, they really knew nothing about genetics. It wasn't until 2003 with the Human Genome Project that we really started sequencing genetics of animals. So you can imagine with us just completing humans in 2003, it took a while for us to get to walleye. So walleye were sequenced more towards the 2020s. So we're really learning more about fish genetics right now. This is a recent article that just came out in 2023. It was a study done by the Missouri Department of Conservation with our help. We helped collect fish for it. It was looking at the different genetic strains of walleye throughout the Ozarks. The results found that the Red River system, which is Greers Ferry Lake, the Ouachita River system, as well as the Walleye River system, really had the same genetics for walleye. The only one that had a different strain was the Black River system. Next slide. Just to go over those results, the Black River drainage were found to have a unique strain known as the Highland strain or the Black River strain. But as I said before, all the other drainages had very similar genetics. These walleye were mutts or hybrids with genetics mostly consisting of Great Lakes strain fish with some Highland strain DNA in there. They also believe that there might be another remnant strain of walleye, but they just don't have a pure specimen to compare it against. That might be like a White River strain. Another thing we found in this study I thought was interesting was the genetics were the same for walleyes collected up the tributaries as the main lake. And these fish were collected in spring, so it means your main lake spawners as well as your tributary spawners had the same genetics. So the genetics of this fish will likely never be known. However, we do know that Greers Ferry Lake does have the genetics potential to grow some nice fish. Here we have Bull Shoals Lake, again, pretty much the same genetics. Lake Erie, very similar genetics because they're mostly Great Lakes fish anyway. You can see how under the right conditions, there's potential to grow nice fish. So to kind of summarize this portion of my presentation, will there be another world record walleye out of Greers Ferry? Not likely anytime soon, but there is a potential for a quality fishery. And it's always our goal to make sure the fishery lives up to its max potential. So at this point you might be thinking, what are you going to do about it? Like, you've told us a lot of bad things, but so that kind of moves me nicely into talking about our fisheries management strategies and activities we're doing to improve the fishery. So I'm going to go through all these, but just to name them, we're working on more consistently and thoroughly monitoring of the walleye population. We're actually going to be sampling next week. Stocking forage fish, monitoring of those forage fish with new technology, habitat enhancement, as well as monitoring of water quality, and then doing some special research projects on stocking contribution and genetics. So for us, sampling is really the starting point for all fisheries management. I like to compare us to someone in the trade, such as a mechanic, to first be able to diagnose the problem of someone's car, he has to pop the hood. And that's what sampling is for us. We're popping the hood and looking underneath to see what tool we need to use to fix it. So some of the common tools in our toolbox are harvest regulations, stocking of fish, as well as habitat enhancement. So to show you how we do fish sampling, we have really two methods for walleye, and that is nighttime electrofishing up the tributaries, as well as using gill nets to collect fish. From this data, from this sampling, we gain very valuable data, including size and age structure, relative abundance, the condition of the fish, also the relative weight, kind of how we get at that, like I discussed before, mortality rate, growth rate, and recruitment. We also interview anglers to gain a lot of knowledge about a fishery. Through creel surveys, we can learn more about their anglers' catch and harvest rates, the size of fish they're harvesting, how many hours they're out there targeting different species, as well as angler opinions and preferences towards the fishery. So we want to continue to stock forage through the Greers Ferry nursery pond. We plan on raising more threadfin shad in it this year. Last year we were able to raise around 1 million fingerling threadfin shad. We hope to do that again. Some of the club members came out and helped us with seining up some of those fish to estimate how many were in the pond, and we're looking forward to doing that again. Jeremy Risley came and he talked a lot about shad biology as well as ways to sample them. So I won't go into great detail, but we're looking to use new hydroacoustics to help estimate the population of shad in the lake. This is our brand new hydroacoustic bow on the left. It kind of scans the lake in a way and can count the shad. So it's very new technology we're trying out. And I talked to Jeremy not too long ago, and we're going to hopefully try it out on Greers Ferry Lake this year. So that's pretty exciting. Habitat enhancement is also, of course, always important. And Greers Ferry Walleye Club has helped with that. Those sea-dew cribs look really nice. Next slide. Here's a look at us doing some more natural vegetation. We have 2 habitat barge that we use to sink and carry out trees. And now we have the new reservoir habitat biologist. We're hoping to be able to do a lot more projects like this. As well as crappie. Here in a little bit you'll see a walleye, a spotted bass, as well as catfish.
Do you have to weigh those down so they stay down?
Yes, you have to weigh them down to sink them. So we use blocks, cinder blocks to sink them. Usually though, once they get inundated with water, they pretty much stay where they are. But of course, you're tying those blocks down.
And on our website, we actually have videos of building those structures and also how many blocks it took to get them down. So it took tons and tons of blocks the first couple of times to do it.
Some of you in the back might not see this, but there's a walleye swimming through there. There's a striper going back the other way. This was actually on Bull Shoals. just a lot of different fish using that habitat there. We also look to improve habitat through establishing vegetation. You might have seen these weird cubes out on the lake. These are the Arkansas cubes. We use them to hopefully disperse coontail through the lake with wave action. We hope that the fragments will establish on the bottom. We haven't had a ton of luck with this so far, but we're going to continue to try new spots. We have some experts with the U.S. Corps of Engineers coming out to help us this year, hopefully, and hopefully we'll get some vegetation established. It's been kind of difficult in recent years just because all of our fluctuations in elevation and lake level. We of course want to continue to monitor water quality. We do review data collected by the U.S. Corps of Engineers as well as the Department of Environmental Quality. And then we want to review your data. We want to work with you to gather temperature and dissolved oxygen data, which we're excited about. And we actually have that YSI here with us tonight. Don't let me forget to get it to you. Some new studies we're currently working on is assessing stocking contribution. In other words, how much does stocking actually produce extra fish? Are our stockings actually helping the population, or most of those fish out there on the landscape, or not landscape, but waterscape, are they from our hatchery, or are they just naturally reproducing? So with new technology, doing microchemistry, we can actually determine the origin of a fish, whether it came from a hatchery or was born and raised in the lake. Talking briefly on how we prioritize stocking, we number one prioritize lakes that need establishment or reestablishment of a population. A good example is the stocking of threadfin shad after 2014. We needed to kind of help or reestablish that population after that large dip. It's not because we don't prioritize Greers Ferry Lake. It has nothing to do with that, why some lakes get walleye certain years and others don't. It's just based on that need. And then we also stock, our second priority with stocking is to improve genetics of a population. And with those two things in mind, we want to continue to monitor the population to determine if there's need for stocking in Greers Ferry Lake, and then also research genetics of walleye, so we can learn more. That way when we do, or if we stock again, we're using the right fish and using it at the right time. So in conclusion, there likely won't be a world record anytime soon. However, the lake does seem like it's improving, and AGFC biologists such as myself and Paul are going to continue to work hard to improve the fishery. And we really appreciate the continued support of the Greers Ferry Walleye Club. So we're going to be out on the lake a lot this year, and we look forward to seeing you out there. We'll pause for a moment and then ask questions.
Yeah, what did you mean by relative size or relative weight when you talk about that? Can you define that for us?
Yes, so relative weight is one metric we get from our sampling. It's from taking both lengths and weight of fish. We have a standard out there that's been studied a lot of what a fish should weigh per its length. So it's a way to say, like, if it weighs, more than this at this length, it's a fat fish. If it weighs less than this at this length, it's a small fish. So I was just trying to explain what the values kind of meant. If it's above a 90, it's a healthy fish. If it's above 100, it's a very healthy fish. But if values below 85 usually indicate that the fish are growing more long than they are wide. They're just a little bit skinny. So we often use that metric to kind of determine where we are with the forage to predator ratio. If there's a lot of skinny predator species, which we're seeing both across largemouth bass as well as walleye, it usually means we have a shortage of forage.
Thank you.
I have a question about the lake here as far as your stocking and food. Do y'all plan on maybe stocking more forage fish like bluegill as opposed to the pelagic shad that feed the stripers?
Right, so over the since pretty much 2014, we've been stocking all forage, and that has included occasional batches through our nursery pond of bluegill as well as fathead minnows. Lately, it's been mostly, I think, like the last few years, have been all threadfin, but I think in 2020, we did a batch of bluegill, literally raising millions, I think, of bluegill. We can, of course, occasionally do a batch of bluegill because they both provide an opportunity for people to catch those bluegill as well as obvious forage for a fish. So we could mix it up every once in a while with bluegill.
So speaking of that, when and where do you release those?
So from a nursery pond, of course, that nursery pond is across Mill Creek by Hignan Bay. So there's just a pipe, and we just pull the plug, and everything from the nursery pond goes into the lake directly.
We've done some ramp stocking in the past too, where we spread them out, not just out of the nursery pond, but the trucks have gone to different access sites, lower lake as well, and stock forage from access sites from a truck.
Do you announce that?
I think last year we worked with the Greers Ferry Walleye Club to kind of help determine numbers in the ponds. We did some seining. We usually announce that through a constant contact email list of when we just did it. So usually we'll do it and then write an email about it shortly after.
I just want to share, we went out fishing a couple of days after that. Don't think you're going to get a bunch of fish just because they release those. We went out and fished for quite a long time, all in that area. And we actually didn't even see
They're
any
probably
of the
pretty
fish.
full if they are there. So.
No, that wasn't happening, but, so in the last couple of years, the water level's been pretty high and pretty low. Is that typical?
I don't know really what is typical anymore for reservoirs. We have natural fluctuations. Sometimes those favor us, other times they don't. Of course, we really don't, as an agency, have control over that since the water level is managed by the Corps of Engineers. But yes, what would you say from a historical perspective?
I think the last decade or so, we've had more high water years than low water years. So we've had more frequent rains, harder rains. That's kind of been the more recent trend.
Is there a location where a person can go to a website and see like the one I get 6 years worth? I want to go deeper than that.
So the Corps of Engineers, of course, keeps all their lake elevation data on their website. So you just need to look up Greers Ferry Lake, Corps of Engineers, lake levels. You can look at their old reports. Unfortunately, they're kind of cumbersome how you get data from them. Usually it is just in little spurts. Sometimes going back, I had to look at just print copies, and hand type those in. So it is hard to get an overview of all the years of data.
Do they have a minimum flow they have to maintain because of the trout in the river?
Yes.
Not on.
Not on Greers? Okay.
No, not on the Little Red.
You gotta have a mic. If you don't have a mic,
I've got a question for you.
yes, we're.
I've got a question.
Yeah, we can hear
Whoever's ever got the mic is up. You're live, go ahead, speak up.
Okay, I want to talk about white perch or crappie, however your term is, Lou. How is a crappie fishing on Greers Ferry? And do they naturally reproduce? And if not, do you stock them?
So we a couple questions there. Currently, there's quite a big population of crappie on the lake. We just got done doing some sampling. We caught more than we ever have in past sampling. There's a lot of 9-inchers out there, but hopefully those will then grow into more desirable 10, 11-inchers. Our guides are quite successful right now. I've talked to a couple of them, or they were in fall when I talked to them. They were catching pretty much limits every day. So crappie do naturally reproduce. They kind of go through ebbs and flows. Usually in high water years, you'll have large batches of crappie being produced or young crappie, in lesser and low water years. So it kind of goes up and down. We have in the past stocked crappie, but again, kind of since we've been seeing these trends in relative weights, we've stopped stocking crappie along with other predator species in 2014.
So the batch, you call it a batch, but the nursery pond, is there an opportunity to get more than one batch in a year, or is there opportunity for a second nursery pond?
So years ago, we had an old diesel pump. We had an old diesel pump out there, and we could run a batch earlier in the springtime, release the crop, and then re-pump the nursery pond back full with this old diesel pump, and then try to run a second crop through it. And the cost associated with running that diesel pump for weeks pumping got to get pretty ridiculous now, the cost of diesel. And that pump was about 30 years old, and it quit working some time ago. But it's a possibility. That the truth of the matter is, when you're stocking fish into a 35,000 acre lake, what you're able to do relative to what the lake is able to do is just a drop in the bucket. So once a fish is established and is out there reproducing on its own, it's got a big enough population, what we're able to do can't compare to what it's doing naturally. So we're just trying, so with the threadfin shad, we're trying to augment the population, give it a boost, get things going again. And so now we've kind of got this shad population built up. So the question is, with the shad we're putting in there, are we matching what the lake is naturally producing? Probably at this point in time, we're probably on the down end side of things.
But you're helping.
It's not hurting, that's for sure.
I first became aware of the lake when I moved here around 2015, 2016. When I came and started asking about the fishing on the lake, the opinion seemed to be that the fishing wasn't real good on Ferry Lake. And as I talked to people and read things about it, what I heard was that it seemed to be the opinion of a lot of the anglers that the hybrid bass were having a negative impact on the fishing in the lake. I'm just asking the question, your opinion about these things. One, when was the last time that you stocked hybrids? And are hybrid bass something that you may consider stocking in the future? And is there any truth to, another thing I heard was that hybrids wouldn't reproduce in the lake. And I'm catching hybrids that are older than 6 years old.
So hybrids were last stocked in 2015, so they do remain in the lake. Most of the hybrids out there are fairly large at this point. There is a lot of white bass out there, so you could be, if you're seeing small, what you think are hybrids, they could just be white bass. For whatever reason, we were just talking about this. Some of the white bass in Greers Ferry Lake every once in a while kind of look like they have a broken pattern, but we've done some DNA tests on them and they are indeed white bass. But yes, there are some out there. Originally, when they were stocked, they were highly popular, believe it or not, and our old creel studies showed that there was a lot of support for those stockings. And at the time, we had plenty of forage, so no one really, they were like, my walleye are still doing well, so no one really batted an eye with those few first stockings. But over time, they kind of became less popular as they, of course, competed with our native species such as walleye. As of now, I have no plans of stocking hybrids again, unless there was a huge push from the public, which I really don't see happening. Do you want to add to that?
Matt was saying when he was in over Greers Ferry, they aged some of those hybrids and they found them up to 18 years old. So they might be around for a while yet, longer, you know, so they do have a long lifespan. They also did some genetic testing on those white bass that had those broken bars, and they were pure white bass.
My question is, and it came up, the Walleye Club was kind enough to present to the Rotary Club, and so we're going to get you some more members. But my question is, a lot of people have been comparing notes and have not ever been checked for a fishing license. Do you guys check fishermen for fishing licenses?
So, as fisheries biologists, we do not. You gotta consider we don't check people for fishing license. That's our enforcement, or game wardens, or wildlife officers. They're the ones that check people. We're only armed with a clipboard, so we don't really want to take on people. So yes, we don't.
What I tell people a lot of, our game wardens are spread really thin. If you're seeing somebody violating or you have suspicions, call the game warden, they'll show up. We set crappie nets, and somebody called the game warden on our crappie nets that we were setting, and he was down there checking on them. So, I mean, they will respond if you call them. And that's how they get a lot of their arrests and tickets, so, by people reporting violations. So, they're spread thin, but, anglers out there need to keep an eye out too.
In the Game and Fish book, the mercury level described in for largemouth bass in Johnson Hole, but not in the lake and not for walleye. Is walleye not susceptible to the mercury contamination?
So, yes, walleye can have mercury. We actually just had advisories put up on Bull Shoals Lake as well as Norfolk Lake. We're looking into potentially doing future sampling here on Greers Ferry to confirm whether or not we have mercury in our fish. It's kind of just a random thing, lake by lake. Some lakes have mercury, others don't, and that's something hopefully we can look into.
Why is Johnson Hole singled out?
Right. So actually, fish consumption advisories are a health department thing, and we kind of work with the health department to collect the fish for them. The last time we collected fish, we collected walleye, and some of them came back hot. Not many, but some did. Why they chose to not do anything at that point in time, I'm not sure. But it was a small percentage of them, as opposed to up at Bull Shoals and Norfolk, a higher percentage of them came back hot. And so the general rule is the older the fish, the higher up the food chain it is, the greater the chance is it's going to be a hot fish contaminated with mercury. Unless you have pretty bad health problems, or are pregnant, or a young child, there's not a whole lot to worry about. The truth of the matter is we've probably been eating hot fish our whole lives, and here we are. It's something we're aware of and we'll continue to work with the health department about.
I've got two questions. First one is you talked about adding forage fish, but what about adding nutrients?
So, nutrients is kind of off the table for Greers Ferry Lake because it's owned and operated by the Corps of Engineers as well as used for water supply. We're really not allowed to add nutrients to it. We do that in some of our smaller lakes that are owned by AGFC, but we can't do that in a Corps of Engineers lake. It would also be very expensive to be able to fertilize that much. Just in one lake that's around 1,000 acres, we spent more than $40,000 to fertilize it per year. So if any of you are farmers, you know fertilizer is very expensive. So we're not allowed to fertilize Greers Ferry Lake because of it being a drinking water supply, and then B, it would just be too expensive anyway.
All right, the second question is, last year, I think we did 2 rounds of adding habitat to the lake. Are you guys going to add more habitat to the lake? Is that something we can help do?
Yeah, we hope to get the club involved with that pretty much annually. We do projects, well, the Corps of Engineers and us help plan projects, and we hope between the three different groups we can continue that and continue to put habitat in the lake.
Out of curiosity, are there any grants out there that would advance you guys to stock more walleye or more shad or something, or the habitat?
Where you get your hands on some cat.
We're all kind of dumb on grants.
I'm not aware of any grants that help supply money for stocking. Really, stocking is just based on need. I can't think of anything for stocking more shad. There are grants.
Hatcheries too, for hatchery capacity for shad production is a limiting factor.
Paul just said our hatchery production, of course, is a limiting factor. We have only so many hatcheries, so many ponds raising fish for the whole state. Really, for that kind of situation, you would have to buy it from a private pond, a private hatchery. It would have to be approved by us and by our fish pathologist. If you guys were to do stockings, it just really isn't feasible, and I don't know of any grants. There are, however, to go on, there are grants out there for reservoir habitat projects, and that's something that the group might decide to do in the future, that you can get grants to help supply the money for funds, even equipment for doing these habitat projects.
I got a question on habitat. There was 2 attempts to get coontail established in the lake, and both failed and cost a lot of money. Then there was an attempt to get, it was willow weed that failed. It's a coontail that was the latest attempt. We haven't heard any status on that. They had cages out.
Yes, we just had cages out. We picked those up. We didn't see any coontail established, but that doesn't mean that there necessarily won't be any there. We need to recheck in spring, because those fragments, of course, in winter would be hard to see. There would just be little bits of coontail probably establishing over winter that kind of just die back, and then we would be able to see whether there was in spring. But so far, we're not really seeing much from those projects. You want to speak to that, Paul?
Yeah, I was going to say, like 2 years ago, we focused on Higdon Bay, or I guess it's been a couple years we focused on Higdon Bay, and we actually scuba dove the area looking for coontail to see if anything had established, and we didn't see any, so we're like, well, let's try something different. So we selected some more main lake stuff and coves off the main lake where maybe the wave action for the boats and stuff would wash those cages more. And so we picked those up in, I think, October.
And so, you know, hopefully this spring, that seeding from last year will hopefully get some stuff established, but we just don't know yet. It's still in its infancy. We're trying. We're going to try putting those cages out again this year. Like Joe mentioned in his talk, the Corps was down on DeGray last year. DeGray, right? Yep. Doing a big project down there. They're scheduled to come up to Greers Ferry and help us get this going up here. So yeah, we'll be doing a lot more of that vegetation stuff. Hopefully get something established. That'd be great for fish. We're all on board for it too. So.
Excuse me. Okay, we got time for one more question.
Where can I get a map of the habitats that have been put into the lake?
We got it on our website.
Yeah, so they're on our website. You can view them through our mapper. It's called the Mapper 3.0. Or you can download them onto your unit, which is probably what you're wanting to do. On our website as well, you go to the main page, you go to Fisheries, and then there's a tab for fish attractors. If you click on that, it'll take you to a page where you can download those.
And we have links on our website on that, and we actually took their map attractors and made it into like 4 or 5 maps to kind of break it down. If you go to that site, it's kind of hard to zoom in, zoom out, and everything on there. There was a question about the last structures we put out. Are the coordinates for those last structures that we put out, are they on the site? Do you know that?
I imagine they are. I haven't checked on those specifically, but we've done some stuff since then, and those are on there. So you might, you know, go back onto there. I'm not exactly sure where you put those scuba or the Sea-Doo crates, but yeah, look on there. They should be on there because they've updated stuff since then. So
it takes them about a week or so to update it. So.
Okay, folks, I don't know about you, but I've got a high degree of confidence that these guys know what they're doing. Let's hear it for them.